Hey, question. Are we really doing this?
Yeah, Nancy, we're really doing this.
Whew. Welcome to She Counts, the Real Talk podcast for women in accounting. We're your hosts, Nancy McClelland,
And Questian Telka.
and every episode we're digging into the real experiences, challenges, and unspoken truths of life in this profession.
Because if you've ever felt like you're the only one, you're not, and you shouldn't have to figure this all out alone.
Special thanks to our sponsors, Forwardly, Ignition, and Keeper, for helping us bring these conversations to life, enabling us to share out loud what everyone's thinking, but no one's saying. Today's episode is called She Counts.
And we're going to deep dive into the topic of why we started this project in the first place, what we hope to accomplish with it, and what an important role we all play making life better for women in accounting.
We love launching each episode with a story and question. I know you have one to share with us.
I pretty much always have a story to share, so you can always count on that. When I first started my firm, I had no accounting colleagues or friends, and I really had nowhere to turn as challenges kind of started to come up. So it was pretty isolating and scary. And there were several times where I had problems that I needed to solve and I didn't have anyone to ask. And so then I started questioning, do I really have enough knowledge to be doing this? Where am I going to find the answer? And I was second guessing, do I have what it takes to run this business and have my own practice? And it wasn't until I found community or a community, Bookkeeping Buds, and met others that I could connect with that I finally began to really find my stride.
And when you say others that you connect with, that's where we met. Bookkeeping Buds community. And I'm so glad we did. My experience was actually pretty different. In addition to being almost 25 years ago instead of 5 years ago, um, you were talking about how, it would send you into a panic. Like, what am I doing? Do I have enough knowledge? Where do I find the answer? Like, oh my God, do I have what it takes to run my own practice? And for me, I was raised by parents who were adamant that I could do anything that I set my mind to. So I actually have loads of displaced confidence that at the beginning, it came from knowing as little as I did. And a spoiler alert for listeners, we're going to be talking about the different phases of learning in a future episode and like what happens when you don't know what you don't know. I knew, however, that I was just stabbing in the dark at a lot of it, and I didn't have anyone to talk to about the fact that I was just making it up as I went along. And I did know some people in accounting, but they were all men, and some of them were really judgy and self-important, and that really made me feel, sometimes it made me feel really small, sometimes it made me feel like I was doing it wrong, and I was embarrassed about that. Sometimes it just made me angry and defensive. And so I just put a mask on and I pretended that I had it all figured out. And wearing that mask, it was actually really isolating.
Yeah, I know. I can't even imagine. I feel like we hear so many stories similar to both of ours. And
Mhm.
so that's why we decided to start this podcast. We really want it to be that safe space for other women in accounting where you can go, whether you are working at a CPA firm in a big four or whether you are in your own practice. We want to be the resource that we both needed and still need when we started out.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. It's not like, oh, back then I didn't have it figured out, but I do now. So I'm going to start a podcast to tell everybody how perfect life is now and how they just need to eventually get to be like me. It's not like that at all. For us, it's like it's a parallel. This is how we're picturing this podcast. It's like a parallel to our WhatsApp groups and our Slack groups of female colleagues that we've met along the way
Yeah,
or
or
the
the conversations that we have when getting together at conferences or meeting for
yes,
coffee and
we both
drinks.
love the conferences.
Yeah, or our Zoom meetups.
Yes, as a matter of fact, that's something that I know you and I both do. Like, we'll get together either like with your local business bestie, you'll get together for coffee and compare notes or drinks, or you were just saying to me the other day that you've started like doing regular Zooms with people that maybe you met at conferences but didn't get to know that well.
Yes, I actually met somebody this week who I had no idea that there was someone local, and I don't have a lot of local accounting colleagues, and met her for coffee, and it was great because I was talking about the podcast, and she started sharing with me some of her stories that are similar to ours.
Yeah, I mean, being able to chat about the common pain points that we as women in the industry deal with, I just neither of us had that back in the day. And so we decided to do something about it to extend or like open up these circles to other women in the industry who are struggling with wondering, with self-doubt. I mean, I guess it's kind of like therapy for us. I hope it
Yeah,
is
the
for
way
you
that
too.
it is. I mean, that's how it started, right? We had Zoom calls. We were sharing pain points and also celebrating things with one another and, just girlfriends getting together and being sounding boards for each other. And so hopefully it will really be like that for everyone else that's listening as well.
I mean, one of the things that I was just saying to a friend and colleague recently who was telling me about something that she was going through. I wrote back, I'm not happy that you're struggling with this too, but I'm also glad that it's not just me.
Yeah, I think that that's a common feeling. I often feel the same way too. It's like, I don't want you to have to deal with that because
Yeah.
that's tough, but at least I'm not the only one, I
Yeah.
suppose. And women really have some specific challenges. I think that quite honestly, men don't have to deal with and for the most part don't necessarily understand what those challenges are that we're facing.
I feel like they're invisible sometimes. I remember when we were talking with Randy Crabtree on the Unique CPA podcast, he told that story. Um, as a matter of fact, for listeners to this podcast that have not yet heard our episode on the Unique CPA podcast, please go listen to it. I thought it was a really great conversation with him because we got to hear some of his perspectives. He was at a dinner where he told his like worst accounting horror story ever. And then they started going around the table, and I think he said it was like half or two-thirds women. And the different women at the table were telling their worst horror stories. And he was like, oh my God, my story's not even like
Yeah.
I gotta pull that off the list. Like he was surprised, like you were just saying. I think a lot of men, they don't, they have no idea. A lot of men have no idea. They know some of the things that we struggle with, but there are a lot of them that are just invisible to them.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk about a lot of these topics throughout the podcast. I mean, that's not the only focus, of course, but we're going to talk about some of those. And it's not about excluding men, it's about making space where women can stop filtering and just be themselves.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, we're hoping that some of these issues resonate with men as well,
Of course, of
and
course.
that they get something out of it, right? Whether
Yeah.
and it could be, they're dealing with their own issues, or it could be navigating what it's like to work with women, whether you're in corporate or at a CPA firm or, running your own business and it's your colleagues, your
It's
partners,
a
your
window into our
employees.
thoughts.
It really is. Yeah. So, speaking of thoughts,
Yes.
we wanted to share a few more thoughts about what we're envisioning for She Counts that
Yeah.
we want to talk about with you.
Yeah, we're planning to have guests, but not every episode. So the podcast is really going to be more topic driven. And part of that is because we really want to hear from all of you what ideas you have, what topics you would like to discuss. And to that end, please also keep an eye out and follow us on our social media, specifically our LinkedIn page, our individual LinkedIn pages, but also we have a She Counts podcast LinkedIn page.
Yeah, we're going to be asking for your opinions, your feedback, your stories, your recommendations, your advice, your favorite books, and your favorite podcasts, and your favorite speakers. As a matter of fact, Liz Farr just emailed us yesterday and was like, "Oh my gosh, I just read this book. It
Oh,
was
what
so
was the name of
incredible.
it? I
I
can't
don't
remember.
remember the name of it."
But it's going to be on an
Um,
episode in
it's
the
gonna be on
future.
an episode because she told me about it and I looked into it and I was like, Liz, this is exactly the type of book we should be reading. And like, could you come on the podcast and talk to us about what you've learned and why you feel that it's so important? So it's when we are hearing from listeners and colleagues and friends, men and women, when we hear your feedback, when we hear your ideas, that's going to make this podcast better because it's not just the podcast that we needed when we were first starting in accounting, but the podcast that we want it to be meeting you where you are right now in your journey.
Yeah. And everyone's in a different place too. And I think this is a space for everyone in accounting, accountants, bookkeepers, administrative people working in accounting firms. So it can be anyone in the space. And, we're hoping to share topics that resonate with everyone. And speaking of topics, we've been keeping a
Speaking of
list.
topics,
Yep. And we have a lot of notes. We've been keeping a list for about 2 years and already
I think
have
it might be
over
two and a
40.
half at this point.
Yeah, we keep saying 2 years, but it's been like 6 months that we've been trying to get this going,
It's been
right?
6
Like,
months that
close
we've
to
been
it.
saying 2 years.
Yeah.
Yes. So I heard you just now say that we have over 40 topics, but I actually went in there. I was in there this morning and we have over 50.
Ooh,
So I think we should share some titles as a teaser.
okay. So one of my favorites, because this has been my life since I started my business, and especially in the last year, is how to make business happen when life happens.
Mhm.
If you haven't had something difficult in your personal life happen while you're trying to work or run a business, if you haven't had it happen yet, you will, or somebody will. So that's a topic that I think is very close to home for me, and I'm excited about that one.
I am excited about that one too. I um I want to talk about the one that was the first idea that we came up with for when we first were talking on a text chat and we were talking about this topic and you were like, "Oh, that should be the first one for our podcast." As a matter of fact, we even thought about naming the podcast this, and it was when we
Yeah.
started the Google Doc. And the episode title is Start with No. And it's about how as accountants, we're helpers and we're people pleasers and we always want to say yes to every project that comes along, to every need that comes along. And what would life look like if we started with no and then had
And
to
then
convince
convinced ourselves.
ourselves, yeah,
Yeah.
convinced ourselves or had ourselves convinced to say yes. And then we decided having a podcast named Start with No was just a little too negative. So I'm glad we changed that.
Yeah, I think She Counts is better.
I think She Counts is better too.
Definitely better. Yeah, and then we also have I engage in too much negative self-talk like a stupid idiot. See what we did there?
And of course, one of my favorites is your favorite place to cry in the office. It turns out that's a thing. And men are shocked when they find out that we all had our safe place to go when we had to cry in the office. It's real. It's
Yeah,
real.
it's a thing. Another one is do it anyway, and this is just about facing your fear, and even if you're scared, doing it anyway, and I think, Nancy and I are doing that right now. So I think we're,
Absolutely.
of course, both nervous, just like anybody would be going into this. So we're going to
One
talk
of
about
my
that.
one of my very favorite quotes ever was when I started 1960s style go-go dancing. And that's where "Do It Anyway" comes from. We'll tell you more about that in a later episode. And then jealousy, envy, and pulling back the curtain.
And this is a good one.
Yeah,
This is going to
yeah.
be a good
This
one.
is a topic that we don't talk about out loud with anyone. It is a hard one to admit when you want something that someone else has that you don't. So, we're going to talk
Yep.
about what that looks like in the world of accounting.
And so back to let's talk about guests again. We'll be
Yes.
inviting people onto the show only as it relates to a topic. So if you've got something you feel other women in accounting need to hear, please reach out to us at info at she counts with an S at the end dot show. So that's dot show rather than dot com, and share your thoughts and perspectives. And we'll see if they line up with any upcoming themes that we're going to be exploring.
Yes. So, there won't be guests every episode, but when we are looking at our list of currently over 50 topics and we see one where we go, oh, who needs to come on the show for that because they're an expert in that area. Um, that's when we'll be bringing people onto the show. And we have some really exciting ones lined up. A lot of people that we love and respect who very generously, very early on offered to be guests on the show, and we can't wait. Question, I
So,
want to talk
Nancy,
also
oh, that's
about,
funny.
are we both about to say the same thing at the same time? What were you going to
I
say?
think so. Yeah, I was gonna ask you if we could share with everyone. We've been talking about what it is, but let's quickly or not so quickly, I guess, share with everyone what the podcast will not be.
All right. Okay. So, we are not going to be preaching. This is not about that because we're not pretending that we've got it all figured out. And even if we did, honestly, I don't think I would ever be a preacher. Um,
Definitely don't have
but
it figured out.
Yeah, we don't have it figured out. We're trying to figure it out ourselves and we need your help. And we hope that you're trying to figure it out and you need ours and we all need, I mean, it's not just you count or I count. It's she counts, like the voices of women in accounting working together to try to figure it out and to try to be better than we already are. So to that end, we're not going to be preaching. We're not going to be like, here is what you have to do. If you don't do this, you're not doing it right. It's not about that.
That's right. And we won't be making motivational speeches. I mean, we're going to keep it positive and try to share things that we have, but we're going to give practical takeaways. This is certainly not man hating. We all have men in our lives. I have two sons and lots of male friends. Some of my closest friends are men. So we are, we're empowering women, but we're not, hating on men in the process. We also don't
Absolutely.
want it to be depressing, but we're going to keep it real. And we want to help everyone, like you said, find solutions. And we want to share. And that's why we really want it to be a community, because we want to share what's worked for us and we want to hear from everybody what's worked from them as well, because that can help everyone else, including us
And
as well.
that's a big passion space for me. I know that you and I have talked about this a lot, but I want to call it out right here. Um, this is not just venting. There will be success stories, there will be practical takeaways, but it has to be, to some extent, about venting. And the reason it does, right? The reason is, I'm very anti-toxic positivity. Question was just talking about how it's not going to be motivational speeches that have no practical takeaways, right? I think motivational speaking is important in many ways, but for me, focusing on the positive without acknowledging how hard the negative is really is invalidating. The good and the
Yes, I feel the
bad,
same.
Yeah, they coexist, right? They don't cancel each other out. This is one of my mantras. And so if you're acknowledging the good in your life and you're acknowledging the bad in your life, then you start to recognize, oh gosh, we're just humans trying to figure this out and get through the world and, make it mostly lean on the good side, but it doesn't always do that. And so sometimes you just have to say, wow, this thing happened. And to have your bestie over here say,
I hear you, I see you, and it's happened to me too.
exactly.
Yeah,
So to
yeah.
that extent,
And
we don't want it to be depressing, but we are going to keep it real.
that's right. And now that we've talked about what the podcast is, what it's not, and why we're doing it. So I think we should probably let everyone know like who we are. Like, why should you listen to us in the first place?
I love that. So basically, you're like, okay, now you know why we're starting this podcast, but who the hell are we?
Yeah,
Who are you
exactly.
listening to? Sometimes I
And
forget
maybe
that
they'll
not
decide they
everybody
don't want
knows
to listen
me.
to us after.
Oh, come
They may just
on.
decide we're not
Everybody
going to
wants
listen to you
some.
after this.
No way. No way. I was just talking about that oodles of confidence early. We've got a lot to say, girl. And anyway, I
I
think
know.
you're amazing and I want to listen to you. I'm sure everybody does. Anyway,
I also want to
let's talk.
listen to you.
You're right. Let's talk about our backgrounds. Who the hell are we?
Yeah. Tell everybody about your background.
All right. So my undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan, the most wonderful school in the universe, is in it's in music education. And I think a lot of people are surprised to find that out about me. I do have a master's in accounting and financial management, but that came later. I actually started out in bookkeeping at the Ann Arbor School for the Performing Arts. And it was a really, really funny job description. It was half time teaching music theory and half time being the office and business manager. And strangely enough, I was the only person to apply for that job. And I got it. And they were using Quicken, not QuickBooks. They were using
Oh,
Quicken.
wow.
Yep. To run the finances. And I was like, I think I can figure this program out. My boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, he was using Quicken for his personal finances. So he taught me a little bit about it. And I found this big stack of uncashed, undeposited checks in the drawer when I first started. And they just decided they would collect checks for the whole semester and then deposit it at the end of the semester. Yeah, there were so many things going on there that, because it was started by a group of musicians. It wasn't started by a group of people who
Yeah.
knew how to run a business. And so that was
And that's the
my
last thing they wanted to do, I'm sure, was worry
I'm
about
sure.
depositing checks. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So that's where I very first was introduced to it. And I loved it. And I saw, there were a lot of people around me that I was in school with who I thought were really excellent music teachers and musicians and composers. But there were not very many people who could speak that language and understand the creative side of it and the education side of it, and also the organizational and business side of it. And I realized that that was kind of like where my gift was. And so from there, I went and I worked at a world famous violin making studio, actually, that is still around, Joseph Curtin Studios in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And that was to this day the best job I ever had because I got to be around music all the time. I got to hold receptions for really famous classical musicians and work with some of the greatest minds in the industry. It's where I met one of my best friends. And that was a wonderful, wonderful experience because as I dived into learning more about bookkeeping and accounting, I got to be very good friends with their tax preparer, Teresa Briggs. And that woman saw in me what I had no idea about, which was I needed to become a tax pro. And she gave me my first CCH Master Tax Guide as a going away gift when I left that
So
job and moved to Chicago.
you had an amazing mentor early on, right? And
Yes,
that's something
yes.
we're gonna talk about in one of the next episodes also.
Yeah, we've both had such important experiences, right? I mean, what would have happened if Teresa hadn't seen that I had this drive, this ability, this interest? I don't. I mean, I'm absolutely sure that I never would have ended up going into tax, and it's something I'm so passionate about. As you know, I run Ask a CPA, which is a community for bookkeepers who have questions that they would love to ask their clients, tax pros, but for whatever reason, and there are lots of them, can't. And so I get to be that person for bookkeepers in the same way that I needed somebody like that in my life.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
important.
So, yeah, that was super important for me. Very, very transformational moment in my life. Then I moved to Chicago. In 1999, I became the accounting supervisor at a not for profit. So I've never worked at a CPA firm, but I have worked internally as an accountant at non accounting firms. And then when I left that role, my husband and I were getting married. My mom had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and I went to stay with her for a while and decided that I just wanted to temp while I was planning the wedding and caring for my mom. I didn't want to do the full job search and find my ideal thing. But it turned out that temping led to me getting hired as a CFO consultant. Because the first client I worked with, I went in there for this temp job and I was like, oh, we all need help. And that was my first client. Accidentally started my own firm and eventually changed
Accidentally
my name to
started
the
the dancing
dancing
accountant.
accountant. Yeah, exactly. Isn't that crazy?
That's where it was born. It's amazing.
Yep.
It's a great
So I
story.
eventually
Yeah.
went back to school, got my master's in accounting and financial management. Then I got my CPA. I expanded. I started hiring team members, including actually Question as a contractor. As she was starting her firm, she had extra capacity and came in to help me out. So we got to know each other really well from that perspective as well. But I grew too big without sufficient SOPs or systems. And I feel like I've been climbing out of that hole ever since, as well as like dialing back to just the hyper local small businesses in our neighborhood that make such a difference in their community. Because I believe that by keeping small businesses healthy, we build character in our own neighborhoods. We help keep these like
Agree.
homogenous big box chains
Of
out. And
course.
so that is our mission. So, I feel like 25 years later, I'm finally starting to figure it out.
You're getting there.
I'm getting there. You know what? We're all works in progress, Question, right? I mean, you have
Of
your
course.
own
All the
non-traditional
time.
path that you took,
Yes.
let's I want to
Yes.
tell us all about that. I want to
Yeah.
I want to hear all about your story.
Yeah, I, as you said, had a very non-traditional path, and I always like to joke and say that I like to do everything the hard way, and I think that my mom would absolutely agree with that sentiment. I'm sure that she's probably gonna be listening to it, and we'll get a good laugh out of it. But, this is something that I struggle to share, and it's because I guess, I struggle to share this because there was a lot of shame that I felt for a long time because it took me, which is what I was getting ready to share, is it took me 3 attempts to finish college, before I finally graduated, and it's not because I was a bad student, because I actually had really good grades, but it was life kept getting in the way, and at the time, I also had undiagnosed ADHD, which I am now aware of, and learned that that is apparently a fairly common struggle for people with ADHD. So, I was going to school to get my accounting degree. I did eventually
Can I interrupt
graduate.
about the
Yeah,
ADHD for a second? I want to
yeah.
interrupt about that because I know we have an upcoming podcast episode that's going to be all about how common ADHD is in the accounting profession. Do you
Yeah.
feel like knowing about that back then would have made a big difference for you?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I mean, understanding the way that I make decisions and why sometimes I can focus on some projects and not others, and how the dopamine in my brain is impacted has made I at least understand why I do the things that I do, because I always felt
Mhm.
like, well, why do I do this? Why is it taking me so long to finish school? School, it's not hard. It was just finding the motivation sometimes to be motivated by things that I wasn't necessarily interested in, which is a big part of, going to college. There are all these classes that you have to take that you may just absolutely hate, but you have to do it anyway.
Whereas I had the
So
opposite problem. I accidentally fulfilled distribution because I've never met a topic that I didn't like. And so I go the opposite. It's true. I end up getting so interested in other things. And so I say yes to this and I say yes to that. And I want to learn how to do this and I want to learn how to do the other thing. And sometimes I don't focus on it. I mean, it's one of the reasons I've struggled with, in my own firm is it's like, oh, but I want to do that thing over
Oh, I do the
there.
same thing. I do the
Yeah.
same thing, which with the ADHD can actually be one of the things I didn't realize is, I'm like, I have a lot of hobbies. I really like
Yeah.
to start hobbies, and then I
Never
eventually
met a
get
hobby you didn't like?
I never met a very unusual to meet a hobby I don't like, but it's it's also very unusual for me to meet a hobby that I stick with for a very long period of
Uh-huh.
time.
Oh, I
So I
see.
tend to like get bored quickly with a hobby and then move on to the next thing. And
So,
so that
actually,
was my
this
problem with
is
school.
yeah, I was gonna take it back to your school experience. I
Yeah.
wish I wish it didn't feel embarrassing and shameful for you because I feel like this probably happens to a lot more people
Yeah,
than
which is why I wanted to share it, because
yeah.
I think it is common, to not have a degree, or to, if you don't, to feel bad about it, or like I have my EA, I don't have my CPA license, for example, and in large part that's just because I don't want to go back to school. I don't I'm not going to do the 150 hours. So but it has no way, it's in no way a reflection of intelligence or skill or knowledge, to be honest. I mean, it is and it isn't, right? So I guess what I'm saying is, because I'm not trying to offend anybody that has a license, like, obviously that's a very difficult and meaningful accomplishment, but that's
Thank you
not
very
the
much.
but that's not the only, how not having it doesn't mean that you aren't
Yes.
also intelligent, knowledgeable, and able to run a business, for example. So
It's one
I
of the
did
reasons that I
finally.
love NATP so much, actually, is that that's where I got my early tax education from after. So, first I went to community college for the tax stuff, and then I studied with National Association of Tax Professionals because they're open to anyone, whether you're credentialed or not. And that was
Yes.
really
Yes.
important for me. So, okay,
Yeah.
when did you eventually finish
I
school
know, I'm
that
like,
third time
everyone's like,
around?
"When did she graduate? When are we gonna get to it? When are we get to." I didn't graduate until December of 2023, so I had effectively finished half of school, and it took me the 3 times to get through it, and, throughout that time, I had accounting courses that I repeatedly had to take, but to be honest, I really taught myself the majority of, if not, 90% of what I learned, I was self-taught, and some of that was obviously from accounting textbooks that were purchased not related to school, but um, to your point, constantly wanting to know everything and consuming knowledge, that was me when I was teaching myself accounting. And I have, even though I didn't get my degree for it, I've worked as a bookkeeper and in accounting for a really long time. And so I was finally going, okay, I just need to do this. Like, I just need to finish this. I need to accomplish it. It's something that, do I have to have it? Probably not, but do I want to have
Well,
it? I
you
do.
remember my reaction when you told me you were
You
going
told me
back to
not to bother.
school.
Yeah.
I was
You
just like,
said,
"You no, I
"Oh."
literally texted you back and said, 'You're insane.'"
You did. Yeah, you did. You told me it was crazy, and then I did
Because
it anyway, and I got sh
she did it anyway. Yes, she did it
yes.
anyway. And the thing is that I knew how much I already knew how good she was at what she was doing because she was working for me as a contractor, right? And so, like, I
Yeah,
could see how good she was. And so I was like, "Why are you going back to school? You don't need this." And she said it's because she wanted it. It was for her.
yeah, yeah. I
I
just
love
wanted to
that.
I wanted to do it for myself,
Yeah.
and so I did, and I graduated with straight A's, which was
Woohoo!
also yeah, I was, like, ridiculous because when I first started going back, I was like, "Okay, I got A's right out the gate." Then I was like, "Well, I have to get all A's now." And so then it became, like, this pressure to get all A's, and I was like, "Why did I do
Again,
this to
pressure on
myself?" Like,
yourself because nobody else was holding that bar up for you.
no, just me, and the only time I ever talk about it is, like, well, right now on the pod I was like, "When do you ever?" But it was something it was like I needed to prove it to myself, right? You know, and
Yeah.
it's like there was a lack of confidence, feeling like, "Oh, maybe I don't maybe I'm missing something. Am I missing some knowledge that I need to have?" You know, I needed
Mhm.
to prove to myself that I was, I don't know, that I could do it, and so I was like,
Yeah.
I was determined, knowing that I had struggled so much to finish something. I was like, I am going to finish this and I'm going to do it the best that I possibly can. So I did.
Wow, that's
And,
amazing.
but also, so that's the span, that's kind of like a wide range of years, right? But before I started my firm, I did actually work at a big four in an internal non client facing role. And so I did that
Mhm.
for the better part of 10 years. And so I really have an understanding of big firm culture. I know what it's
And we are
like. I
very
didn't
specifically not naming where she worked because there are a lot of future episodes that talk about some of the not so great experiences there. Also some great experiences.
Yes. Yes, and one of the great experiences I did have is I actually had an amazing mentor. So when we talk about mentorship, I will
Yes.
share some stories about her. But yeah, there's some not so amazing experiences, but also it definitely taught me how to be extremely professional, sometimes
Mhm.
at the risk of my own emotions, but,
Right?
I think that it definitely gave me a good background in a lot of ways too. And so I did that for a while, and then I worked in a nonprofit as the director of finance and accounting. And that's where my love of nonprofit specific accounting and nonprofits in general just started. I loved working there. Again, I had another amazing mentor, but she didn't work in accounting. And so she
Mhm.
wasn't able to give me those tools that I needed, for example, although she did everything she could to try to give me what I needed if I asked for it. Um, she just wasn't an accountant, so from a different background. And
Right.
while I was working there, I kept having people approach me and ask me to help them with more nonprofit accounting. And so I saw that there was this need that was unfulfilled. And it took me a long time before I decided to start my own firm. And in part, I did that because it was right around COVID time. But I, while I was working in that nonprofit, I gave birth to my second son, who is now 7. And it's really impossible for me not to talk about his birth and, highlight his coming into our lives because it completely changed the trajectory of my life. It completely changed the way that I view people, the way that I view the world. Um, so a lot of people already know this, but for those of you that don't, I have a son that has a very rare chromosomal abnormality and is a syndrome. And when he was born, he spent 6 weeks in the NICU. And before the age of 2, he had 8 very, very intense surgeries. And
I can't
so
even imagine what that was like for you. I cannot
I
even imagine.
I haven't even fully processed it yet. It's like 7
Yeah.
years later, but, that's a work, and it's a work in progress, like you say.
Yeah.
We're always a work in progress. So,
Yes.
um, when that was going on, I was like, I really need to be able to work from home. And to be fair, they were incredible. They were incredibly flexible, very supportive,
At
so
your
amazing
job?
about it at my job. Yep.
Mhm.
And it was a little while after. So I don't know, I think he was a couple years. Yeah, it was a couple years old because I've had my firm for 5 years now. And I decided that's when I was like, okay, I want to be able to be present and be here and go to these doctor's appointments and take him to be able to do the things that I needed to do and just have that flexibility. So it was a combination of the two things that really led me to starting my own firm. And so the his birth, along with recognizing that there was a need. So and his birth also really changed my views because I feel like I was a pretty cynical person. My mom
Which
will
is
kill
so
me for saying
hard for
this, but
me. Yes, it's so hard for me to imagine that. I have known you for long enough at this point that, I know this story, and I know I have heard you say this numerous times, and yet it is very hard for me to imagine that because you are someone who seems to just like everyone you meet, like
I do.
genuinely like everyone you meet.
I wasn't always like that. But he when he was born, I would have expected, and we did see this, right? We had people who would say negative things, or they would stare, or there would be, any number of negative things. But what I really saw was the good in people. And
Mhm.
what I really noticed is it completely changed my view. I mean, not completely, because I can't say I had a fully cynical view, or it would have been impossible for me to move from that place to where I am now, but it definitely was much more cynical than it is now. And I just tend to generally see the good in people, and this really also made me want to just lean in more to nonprofit work, and
Mhm.
specifically to disability advocacy nonprofits. I'm also a a treasurer of a nonprofit that advocates for um, people of all abilities, and that's local in Chapel Hill. It's called B3 Coffee, and it's an amazing organization. And so I feel like that, again, my whole trajectory completely changed based on that. So I saw the good in people, and that also continued on to the women's issues, right? So I've always kind of considered myself a feminist, or an advocate for women's rights. And that ability to be more open with people and to have those
Mhm.
conversations with women, after I kind of changed my view of how I see people in the world. And I started hearing all these stories, which really made me want to do this podcast with you.
Well, and it sounds like you're saying that, this shift in perspective that helped you to see the good in people also helped you open up and talk to people and see the similarities as opposed to just
Yes.
the contrasts.
Yes.
Well,
Absolutely.
I we've only got about 5 minutes left, and I don't want to end this without you at least briefly sharing the story of how we met, because that's a perfect transition
Yeah.
into how it was we met. You looking for the similarities, you trying to foster real connections with other women in accounting.
This is one of my favorite stories because it's really funny, and it's also so Nancy. In a very good
Oh
way. I
boy.
mean, just very
Here
direct,
we go.
I hear very direct. You always know where you are, where you stand. So we met through Bookkeeping Buds, which is a an organization of women run by Cindy Schrader. It's amazing, and it's a very active group of women at conferences, and they have a very busy Slack channel. And I joined it looking for connection, right? And community. And I kept seeing posts from you in there, and I was like, wow, she's really smart and she's funny. And
Aw.
so I sent you a private message. And I know you don't remember this story, but I sent you a private message and was like,
I do
can
not.
we be
I've heard
friends?
this.
And she said, no, I don't have time for that.
I still, to this day, I feel like I wish I could search the Slack
I
history on that
know.
one
I
because
swear it's the
it's so
truth.
hard for me to believe. Did I really tell you no because I don't have enough time? That's so sad.
Yes.
I'm
Yes, you
sorry.
did. But I'm persistent
You are.
and
Oh
you
my goodness,
clearly
you are.
because we're friends. And and also we that persistence is what kind of got us to the podcast too. Do you want to tell that story?
Sure. So so eventually she wore me down apparently. Again, I don't remember saying no, but it also sounds like me. I am very direct. I don't like beating around the bush. I always joke that I'm not passive aggressive. I'm aggressive aggressive, right? Like I will tell you what I think. And so we became friends and I was like, wow, she is super smart and she's starting her own firm. She has extra capacity. I'm going to see if she would be willing to contract with me for a while. And she did, and we had a really good experience with that, and became closer as a result of working with each other. And over again, we were just amazed by how much our thoughts were helpful to each other and resonated with each other, not just about firm running. Um, there's an excellent podcast out there that is also new with Candy Bello and Sam Halburn about firm running that they're doing for Anchor, which I highly recommend to anybody who's listening to this. But we weren't just talking about firm running; we were talking specifically about so many issues that were very specifically about being a woman in accounting.
Counting. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, question you had a phrase that you came up with to sort
Yes.
of represent those types of conversations.
Yeah, I say we have conversational chemistry because we could just sit and talk to each other for hours. And what ends up happening is, well, at least for me, like all of my creativity, all of my creative ideas and thoughts just come out. And I feel like we just have these incredible conversations and they're about topics that I wanted to talk about and hear about, which is why we were having that conversation anyway. And so that's what we're trying to bring to everyone.
And so she and I were having this one conversation, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, we should start a podcast." And this time I do remember saying, "No, I don't have enough time." I said,
Yep.
"Absolutely not." And then we kept having these conversations, these topics kept coming up. And so we were like, well, you know what? Let's imagine that someday far in the future, we do start a podcast. Let's at least capture these. And so she took a screenshot of that text conversation and saved it in a Google Doc. And that was the genesis for the podcast. And she's persistent
And
and wore me
I just kept,
down.
yeah, I wore you down again
Um,
because I was like,
again.
she's gonna be my friend and we are gonna do a podcast. And if I start just taking notes and keeping lists of podcast ideas, then eventually she'll give in.
And it's true.
And here
It's
we are.
absolutely true, and actually, I have to give a special shout out. All of our sponsors are absolutely amazing. We love Forwardly, Ignition, and Keeper. They've been so supportive and incredible. These are, products that we use and people that we know in the industry, and genuinely,
Mhm.
like, I need to give a special shout out to Ignition because I was a top 50 Women in Accounting awardee some years ago with them, and this year they've started a grant process for past awardees, and we received a
So
grant.
they do the award every other year now, is that why
Yes,
they're
they
doing
changed
the
it.
okay.
Instead of doing the award every year, they now do it every other year. And on the off years, they really focus on trying to lift up our voices and support our projects. And so they were the first ones. I said, well, we've got this Google Doc, and these are the types of things that we want to talk about, and immediately supportive. Absolutely. Chelsea over at
Yeah.
Ignition was, so they were the first people. And then we were like, well, and we started talking with Earmark, and then we started talking with Forwardly and Keeper, and everything came together, and now we are here, and so are you, and we're so grateful, and just want to thank you for being here with us on She Counts, the Real Talk podcast for women in accounting.
Yeah, and before we sign off, we want to leave you with a quote that a dear friend of ours, Shirley Koss, shared with us, which we really feel embodies the heart of what we're doing here on the podcast. And that is, go where you're celebrated, not where you're tolerated. And we really hope that you feel welcomed into this space and enjoy having a seat at the table with us.
And if something in today's episode hit home for you, well, that's exactly why we're doing this. So you feel seen and heard and never alone.
Please make sure to follow us on our LinkedIn page. It's She Counts Podcast LinkedIn page, and help us brainstorm and come up with ideas for future sessions. We'll be posting the episodes and then be also having an open dialogue and conversation there with everyone about the topics that we are talking about every other week.
And please subscribe and share this with another woman in accounting who needs to hear it too.
Our next episode is called She Believed in Me Before I Did, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.